how they are also tripping up and getting in trouble for really flagrant violations of conduct and behavior. If you think about Oxfam and Haiti last year, certainly that created quite a stir. Here we have aid workers who are charged with actually helping populations who are trafficking people, hiring prostitutes. And when these kinds of things happen, it's a nightmare for these organizations, and they oftentimes revert to, we need to have better compliance training. I think there's more there. I think we need to get beyond just the lens of compliance to actually thinking about capacity and where do we get real thoughtful training built that changes behavior. I don't think we get that in a 30-minute self-paced course, slide-based, where people click through and take a quiz. In terms of other trends, I think we're seeing a lot of focus on digital transformation. I think there's just a fear, again, that people and organizations that don't adapt to the new world order where technology is at the center of people and process. At the same time, the aid sector is notorious for being overworked and having very limited amount of time to focus on learning and development. So it has devolved into self-paced, on-demand, point-of-problem learning, hyper-focused on skills, and less so on networks and relationships. I think, and I'd like to think that that's changing. I'd like to see more training focused on networks and relationships and soft skills. I think that's a slow change.
In terms of what we're just talking about here, many international, my understanding is that many international NGOs have to demonstrate to their funders. Sometimes if they're charitable organizations, there might be just the general public. In other cases, it might be a funding body like USAID or DFID, which are the national funding organizations in the US and the UK. But they have to sort of demonstrate that as much of the money as possible is focused on the point of need, doing the work that needs to be done. And I think I understand that this often means that staff training and the preparation, the building of skills and capacity, both in those organizations, the aid organizations, and then the smaller aid organizations who help get the work done at the point of need. Often training and development is kind of shortchanged if it's not about compliance. Is my understanding, am I right in understanding that? And is the approach changing? Do you see any optimism around a different approach?
You're definitely right. I think there is some movement around a new world order with respect to training. I think if we look at so many conversations that focus on the future of work, pushing us farther into remote and distributed workforces, I think there's just a stronger need to build soft skills and relationships alongside traditional hard skills. And the NGO sector, honestly, they've been at the forefront of this, given how global these organizations are. The challenges between headquarters staff and field staff, those are decades-old challenges that these organizations have been grappling with that, frankly, a lot of multinational corporations are just beginning to really feel. Startups that have a team in Sri Lanka and a team in the United States, and they're doing content overseas and tech work in the U.S. Those are newer challenges to the startup scene and the private sector scene, whereas I do think NGOs are really grappling with this and thinking through not just the efficiency cost-saving dimensions, but also the how do we do this right on a moral and human level so that we're not really screwing the people that we're trying to help in these remote markets and destinations, but actually encouraging all kinds of sustainable and equitable development.
Nick, I think your primary focus is teaching technology, but I've seen some amazing examples of how organizations in the sector, particularly local NGOs that are constrained in all kinds of ways, I see amazing examples of the creative use of technology, maybe even just consumer level technology, things like Facebook. Is technology a primary focus, and what tech skills are most in demand? And do you have any stories of how people are doing cool things with technology that we can learn from?
Well, I say the skills that I'm seeing the most demand for, there's sort of the data literacy bucket, things like data analysis, data management, data visualization is a big one. Very closely tied to the field of monitoring and evaluation, which is really an industry built on top of the aid industry designed to evaluate, are the programs and the interventions we're designing, are they actually working? And to do that well, all kinds of technology tools come into play. And a number of our students and organizations that work with us are really interested in that monitoring and evaluation piece. There's also the emerging technology piece. What's on the horizon that my organization needs to be thinking about and concerned with that's 5, 10, 15 years ahead of its of being widespread? Things like blockchain, artificial intelligence, drones, machine learning, all these things. We're finding a lot of students and organizations are really interested in those topics as well. And what we're finding is oftentimes students that do enough courses with us, or they get sponsored through their organizations, are able to get jobs and to either move up in their organizations or to move laterally to organizations that they've always wanted to work with. We had a student, Ivy, who did an MBA and then decided locally in, I believe she was in Nigeria, and then decided that she didn't learn as much as she could have in that program and ended up taking a series of 4 courses with TechChange, and it was ultimately TechChange courses that got her her dream job at I think it was at AT&T, but doing social sector work for the company. So yeah, I think there's lots of examples like that where students are not finding the skills that they need in traditional educational outlets, and we've designed a curriculum which is a lot more responsive to the sort of immense speed and pace at which technology is evolving, and hyper practical, so that it really does lead people to skills and relationships that get them employment. And that's ultimately what most of our learners are after, because we are kind of a professional development, adult learning educational provider.
So let's dive a little bit into the how and your sort of philosophy on your products. On your website, you say that current solutions for online training are broken. They often leave users feeling bored and isolated. But we believe that every course we teach or create is a chance to build and foster community. We believe adult learners learn best when they can connect with others. So community, this concept of community and peer-to-peer learning are obviously central to your philosophy. What does that mean in terms of how you build, design, and run your programs?
One way to think of it is sort of the anti-MOOC. We're not in the business of getting tens of thousands of students into one glorified virtual lecture hall and having one smart person thrown on for an hour lecture style. We spend a lot of time on learner engagement, and so that means synchronous alongside asynchronous sessions. It means having people you're paired with during your learning experience who are another sounding board and build activities around that paired experience, mentorship and coaching, group conversations, lots of real-world projects. I'll give you 2 quick examples. We did this thing in our blockchain and cryptocurrency course where we gave each of our students a very tiny amount of Bitcoin, and we had them exchanging cryptocurrency, setting up wallets, learning how this particular medium might be useful for distributing aid and cutting down on fraud. And so it was really practical, but it also demonstrated how a global community of virtual learners could exchange value beyond just trying to wrestle with the likes of Western Union. So that's one. And then the other one I love to talk about is we spent a lot of time helping people prepare for sharing back whatever they're learning to their office or to their community or to their family. And so in that course, we called block parties, where people were learning about blockchain, and then they were setting up and designing actual real world events where they got to foster conversations in community, in their organizations, at their home, in their community, around some really provocative topics related to cryptocurrency, blockchain, distributed ledger technology, and so forth. So just a few examples, but that's the idea, is that we're really trying to get beyond just watch a video, take a quiz, which tends to dominate online learning in so many capacities.
you touched on it a little bit, but clearly learner engagement is often the hardest part of any program and often the most overlooked and underinvested in, especially, when organizations fund to get curriculum built, they very rarely think through the hard work of landing that curriculum. How have you focused on student engagement? And perhaps if you can, you could touch a little bit on credentials and the value that students take away.
Yeah, I think this is such a good question, Chris, and there's probably a couple entry points into it. I think one maybe place to start is that I think two of the great assumptions we make in online learning is that somebody who teaches a workshop in person will be a great online educator. That's often not the case. Or that somebody who's a subject matter expert in a topic is by necessity a great teacher. And so more often than not, we fall into those two traps. So when we think about engagement, we're not just thinking about the content and the expertise that person possesses, but we're also thinking whatever works in the classroom does not necessarily work online. And so for us, we've really spent the last 10 years trying to experiment and play with what ultimately gets people to engage with content. And we've come up with our list of what we think makes sense. And obviously there's excited to hear from your listeners what else works for them. But gamification pieces, but intentional gamification. We have a point system that tracks progress through a course. When people pay for courses, that tends to matter. They tend to ultimately have more stake in their learning. That social piece, which I've touched on, does really matter for driving engagement. If you have somebody who you are paced with, who's helping to make sense of complicated topics, so you have a weekly call with, if you have a group that you are obligated to connect with at a certain interval, and the activities that you've structured as facilitators, the activities we've structured are designed thoughtfully and intentionally, then that tends to keep people learning longer. And the last thing I'll say here is it's got to be relevant. It's got to be connected to what they're doing. And we talked a bit about how most learning is trending towards what I like to call point of the problem. Like whatever thing I'm going wrong in my life right now, I need a learning solution quickly. What can I Google? What can I take a quick 20-minute course on? What's that YouTube video? So that tends to be one trend. But there's also people that are in great transitions in their lives, and for them, courses that are longer and more involved can actually lead them in new directions. They don't necessarily know where they want to go, but they're open to learning in ways that they may not be on the job. Regardless of where people are in that spectrum, we want to make whatever content, activities, and exercises real-world relevant. We want to tie directly to their jobs. We want to get their ecosystem, the people around them, invested in their learning in ways that they may not traditionally be. And I think a lot of that is tied to assessment. We're not just trying to quiz what you watched in the YouTube video. We're actively trying to think through how whatever we ask you to do in a course can directly help you in your job tomorrow. And I do think that matters a lot.
Do you offer a credential? Can I get a certificate or credential from TechChange or your partners?
We do, and we do with the partners as well. And certainly the Microsoft TechSoup partnership has all kinds of certificates connected to it as well. And I think one last thing I'll say on this and why we've evolved the model we have, we control both the technology stack and the pedagogical approaches that we take. And for us, that decision was intentional. It's kind of crazy to build your own learning platform. We decided to do it because we kept hitting barriers with what we wanted to do pedagogically, educationally, with Moodle and edX and all of these endless amounts of learning management systems that exist on the market, which are frankly built by tech people, not educators. There's just a fundamental philosophical difference in how tech people think about what education should be. And occasionally you get features that work for you, and as you mentioned, you get creative solutions that emerge from those constraints. But to be able to control the tech stack as an educator and to design a course experience built by educators for educators, I think is pretty revolutionary. And I think as hard as it's been, as complicated as it's been, I'm very grateful for that ability to control both sides.
So for you, the pedagogy and